Well, good afternoon, opera folk, and hopefully non-opera folk. I'm glad to be back with you on behalf of Virginia Opera, and we're here to talk about the king of all Viennese operettas by the Waltz King, Johann Strauss Jr.'s Die Fledermaus. This is an opera that is, I'm going to call it an opera. It's a sort of a moot question whether it's an operetta or an opera or what the difference is. That's a subject I always find a little tedious. But it's a piece that's very dear to my heart. Those who may have picked up a copy of my book, The Opera Zoo, Singers, Composers, and Other Primates, will know that the final section is a journal that I kept when I was privileged to be cast as the prison warden Franck in a festival production of this piece in Rome, Italy, a couple of summers ago. So it's very dear to my heart, not only for the wonderful music from start to finish, but for the what I would call extra musical associations I have with Fledermaus, the friendships that I made with the cast members, and that will actually bring to bear on one of my talking points a little later in the broadcast. But this is something that is very dear to my heart, and I hope you will come. And, here's another reason for coming. As you know, Die Fledermaus opens 1 week from tonight at the Harrison Opera House. And that's going to be the first Saturday following the presidential election. Now, look, whoever you're voting for, whether your guy wins or loses, aren't you going to be in the mood to celebrate the end of the campaign season and the end of the constant emails telling you that, your $10 is going to tip the scales in favor of your candidate and all of the awful commercials? I think we're all going to breathe a sigh of relief, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate than the greatest party operetta of all time, Die Fledermaus. So for that reason alone, I want to see you there at one of the performances during this run. Well, I'm going to do something a little different than normal today. I could just tell you about the characters and play you the music and little insights about how Strauss tells his story, and I will do that a little bit later on, but that's not enough to appreciate the achievement of Die Fledermaus. There is a phenomenon here. You need a little context in order to understand what this piece is and truly get it. And I want you to get it. And there's a strange thing. I am Dr. Glenn Winters. I have 3 degrees in music, as if anyone cares. And, from very fine music schools, I took more music history classes and musicology classes than you knew there were in the world, unless you're also a musician. And there's a strange mystery having to do with Viennese musical life in the middle of the 19th century that was ignored by all of my scholarly professors during my entire musical education, and I hold them accountable for that. And it amounts to this. Those of us who are in the field of music, when we think of Vienna, Vienna is the mecca of Western classical music. From about 1750 until the early 19th century, 1820-ish, you have what many people feel is the finest fusion of style, form, and expression ever achieved in the works of Joseph Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and even into the early Romantic period, Schubert. And when we think of those composers, we think of abstract concert music, serious stuff, red meat, symphonies, chamber music, string quartets, violin sonatas, piano concertos, oratorios, big, serious classical music. And then from around the 1880s on, look at what you've got. You've got post-romanticism with Anton von Bruckner and Gustav Mahler, gigantic symphonies that attempt to explain the nature of the human experience and the cosmos. You've right there in Vienna, you've got the second Viennese school from the 20th century through maybe the Second World War with Schoenberg, Alban Berg, Anton von Webern. Good grief, German expressionism, serialism, atonality, that music that makes many of you listeners make the sign of the cross when Dwight and Sherry and the others play it. Doesn't get more serious than that. Now do you ever stop to think of the Viennese composers from about 1830 up to about 1880, a half century of music? Who is there? Where are the string quartets? Where are the symphonies? What the heck happened to Vienna? Now, if you listen to WHRO regularly, and I hope you do, and I hope you've pledged during the recent drive and all that good stuff, you know that the kind of music they play during drive time. During drive time, classical stations feel that, harried commuters and discouraged salesmen, stuck in traffic, they don't want to hear Rachmaninoff's Isle of the Dead. You know what I mean? They want light, melodic, frivolous music. So you get a lot of waltzes and polkas and light cavalry overtures and so forth. The kind of music that my professors steadfastly ignored, because all that musicologists ever want to talk about is Gregorian chant, the proper and the ordinary of the Catholic Mass, and symphonies, and tone poems. We've got an entire generation of frivolous music in Vienna. What happened to that zeitgeist of explaining the cosmos, and why are we just dancing? Well, I've looked into this. I've read biographies of the composers. I've got some ideas about this, and this is what you need to understand, because, of course, Die Fledermaus is the apotheosis of this phenomenon. It is an entire 3-act opera with nothing but dance music. Every single moment of music is in a dance form. So what happened? Well, we have to go back and understand life in Vienna. When you think of Die Fledermaus and Johann Strauss Jr., you think of a little word association. If you were here in the studio with me and I asked you to call out the images that come to mind, you would say waltzes, Waltz King. You'd say melody. You would say champagne. You would say Linzertort, Sachertort, all those desserts where you eat one piece and you don't want to eat again for a week. You think of whipped cream in the coffee, those Schlagobers. You think of attractive men and women dancing divinely, the glamour of old Vienna. Guess what? It didn't really exist. That is an image that is in stark contrast to the rather gritty reality of life in Vienna for much of the 19th century. Let's go back to... This is going to sound like history class, but bear with me. I think it's pretty interesting. Let's go back to the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon running amok through Europe and Italy and trying to take down the Habsburg Empire and so forth. Life in Vienna was pretty tough then. It was traumatizing. It was like living in London during the Blitzkrieg. People lived in terror every day. And when the Napoleonic era was coming to an end, the Western European nations gathered for a big summit conference to try to find a way forward, the Congress of Vienna, fall of 1814 to June of 1815. And this is when the modern nation of Austria was really created. No longer, the seat of the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburg Empire. Now it's just Austria, like you could visit today. And their first ruler was the Emperor Franz I. And his representative at the Congress of Vienna was his chancellor, Klaus von Metternich, a very interesting guy. Franz and Metternich decided for Austria's future that they were not so much interested in learning the lessons of the French Revolution and installing a constitutional monarchy, taking care of civil liberties and human rights and so forth. They wanted to double down and have an iron grip on a traditional old-time absolute monarchy. And at the urging of Metternich, the emperor instituted what I can only describe as a police state. The people of Vienna lived in a very oppressive, highly censored lifestyle. Newspapers were heavily censored. They had little idea of what was happening around them in Poland and Norway and so forth. Of many of the progressive reforms that you were seeing in the rest of Europe. Public gatherings of more than 4 or 5 men were illegal. You could get hauled in and questioned by the secret police. They were spying on you. They knew if you were a rabble-rouser. They might suspect you of being a rabble-rouser. And this gave rise to the phenomenon we call the Biedermeier period. In the Biedermeier period, the Viennese were, as I say, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder anyway. It was kind of okay with them. They kowtowed to Metternich's police state. People were just kind of wanting to lick their wounds, stay at home, make homespun furniture and homespun music that was not very complicated, not very political, gone. Even though Beethoven was still alive through all this, Beethoven's music fell into decline. And you've had a lot of the type of music that Schubert wrote when he was in his Biedermeier mood, album leaves, simple little waltzes of 16 bars with maybe a tonic and a dominant chord for the harmony, two chords, and people lost a sense of ambition. They were in a state of cozy denial. They did not strive to achieve very much. People just wanted to lick their wounds, stay at home, play simple tunes, and have a simple lifestyle. It's been called a state of narcotic, cozy escapism. I sort of compare it to what happened in the United States following World War II when we were kind of traumatized. Look at what happened with our sitcoms. Look at the cozy domesticity of Father Knows Best and Donna Reed and all those old-time shows. Nothing cynical, nothing very challenging, nothing very political. The worst problems that people in those TV shows encountered was if Junior chewed gum in class or played hooky from school. We went through a Biedermeier period. And what happened in the United States in the 50s? A dancing craze. A guy named Chubby Checker comes along and invents this dance that sweeps the nation, the twist. And suddenly, all the young people are juking out to the twist. All right, let's go back to Vienna. Dancing was allowed by Metternich. You could meet, and Vienna had wonderful dance palaces, the Apollo, the Sparrow, these glorious, luxurious, expensive dining halls and dance halls where people danced this craze, this new waltz sweeping the nation. The waltz, the valser, far different from the minuet. A very stately and slow and aristocratic dance where there might be 6 yards of daylight between you and your partner. Now we had a much more athletic dance. We had a dance in which the partners were perspiring, women perspiring in public and breathing their hot breath on the neck of their dance partners. It was X-rated, I tell you. And people loved it. The old guard was shocked, but people loved the waltz. And the father of the waltz, the guy who corresponds to Chubby Checker, the father of the waltz was a guy named Josef Lahner. He took the old-time waltz and he upped the tempo, made it more graceful, more swirling, a little catchier, a little more what we think of as Viennese. Here's an example of Josef Lahner's waltz. This is the Pester waltz a little bit. Well, Josef Lahner became a rock star in Vienna. He started off with a trio that grew to an orchestra because his music was better than the other old fogey waltz composers. He eventually had 2 orchestras, 3 orchestras, 4 orchestras. He was a court composer. He would tour Vienna, making appearances, conducting a few numbers, making the rounds of all of the dance halls in Vienna. He was wealthy. He was adored by women. He was a handsome devil. And the waltz became a phenomenon. Thousands of Viennese with not much else to do dancing the waltz. And his roommate and best friend was a young guy named Johann Strauss. No, not the Fledermaus. As you know, there are 2 Johann Strausses. There's daddy and son. This is Johann Strauss Sr., who was an assistant and a best friend to Josef Lahner, but who decided, well, I can do this, and in fact, I can do it better, and he started his own orchestra. And if Lahner was the Chubby Checker, the father of the twist, the father of the waltz in old Vienna, well, Lahner was very Biedermeier. He didn't tour much. He mostly just stayed in Vienna. He made a few cursory tours of Vienna, of Italy rather, but he really preferred to stay at home. Well, that's a very Biedermeier attitude. Strauss the senior was quite different. He was a little more Elvis. Now we're into Elvis. He internationalized the waltz. He toured Europe. He would rather tour than be in Vienna. And as wealthy and famous as Lahner was, Strauss outdid him by a considerable amount. It was Strauss who created the more symphonic version of the waltz with an introduction and with a chain of 5 waltzes of contrasting character, a little bit like the contrasting movements of a symphony. He was a very, very fine musician who was content, again, realize no symphonies, no concertos, no chamber music, waltzes and galops. The polka was not yet in vogue because, of course, you were still under censorship. You didn't know what they were dancing in Poland, and the polka is a Polish dance, the galop. But notice here there's a little bit more muscular drama to Strauss the senior's waltzes. He is the Beethoven of the waltz, whereas Lahner is perhaps the Mozart. Here's a little bit of his Lorelei Rheinklänge waltz. You see what I mean about the drama, and that's important. His son was not going to be able to, no one could really make a theater piece out of waltzes and other dances until those dances had the capacity of expressing drama, and there's plenty of drama in that waltz. So now it was left to his son, Johann Strauss Jr., who had a very thorny relationship with his father. I'll tell you this, if you knew Johann Strauss Sr., you wouldn't have liked him. He was kind of a megalomaniac and a narcissist, and he abandoned his family. He forbade his son to study music. Well, you can't keep talent down. Johann Strauss Jr. Did master the violin and the piano, and eventually he became, well, maybe let's now compare with America's Biedermeier period. Let's talk about the British invasion, the Stones and the Beatles, because the waltz became global with Johann Strauss Jr. He didn't just tour Europe, he went to America. And now it was a world, well, maybe not in South Korea or Tokyo, but in the civilized world, as it was considered in those days, the waltz was now a worldwide mania. He spent several months in Boston conducting gigantic festival orchestras and public concerts of waltzes, and he was a billionaire in today's terms. And now, following the revolutions of 1847 in Europe, censorship was lifted, Metternich fled for the hills, that police state was over, and now you can import things from other countries. So now, instead of the old-fashioned galop as a fast two-step waltz, now we replace it with the polka. Here's an example of Strauss Jr. with his famous Tritsch-Tratsch polka. And I was very amused, well, not amused, but there's an irony with that kind of joyous and very rapid dancing. As you can imagine, that's something that's going to leave you kind of breathless. Well, you know, a lot of the men who went to these dance halls in Vienna did not go with their wives. I'm gasping in horror. Yes, it was a time of a lot of adultery, a lot of divorce, and what happened is when the polka was danced, a lot of men were taken to emergency rooms because they dropped dead. You've got middle-aged men out with an 18 or 20-year-old girlfriend, mistress, and of course the girl can dance all night long, but the out-of-shape 49-year-old guy is getting red in the face, but his fragile male ego won't let him just sit down. So men were dropping dead by the dozens every ball season. Anyway, when Die Fledermaus opened in Vienna, of course, where else would it open? Poughkeepsie. And this was in 1874. You would think, well, by now Strauss was world famous and very wealthy. So you would think, gosh, this must have been a glorious success, the capstone of his career. Well, eventually. The fact is that first season in Vienna, it played to half-empty houses. It did not take off. It didn't bother him. He was so wealthy he didn't feel it. You know why? Because nobody could afford the tickets. Europe was in the grip of one of the great financial collapses of all time, the Great Depression. These days we're all afraid that Greece is now that Greece, the economy has gone in the tank, we're afraid that the dominoes will fall and the euro will fall and that will affect us here in the United States and we'll have a cataclysmic depression. It's already happened. In 1869, the silver market collapsed in the U.S., and this affected all of Europe. There were a series of Black Fridays in which stock markets crashed, fortunes were lost, people committed suicide. It's such a paradox that this most celebratory of all stage pieces debuted at a time of despair and financial ruin for many of the citizenry. So you look back at Vienna, Napoleonic Wars, terror, a police state. There was a cholera epidemic in 1832 that actually contributed to the popularity of the waltz. People felt like, well, why should I go study to be an architect when all of my neighbors are dying? I might as well just go dance. And then the revolutions of 1847, a cataclysmic depression. Life in Vienna was more than Zuckertort and Schlagabers, my friends. It was pretty rough. So you have to understand the context of this. This opera means something different to us today than it did to the original audience. But let's spend the rest of our afternoon, our time together, looking at this opera. Well, now that the Pearl Fishers is behind us at Virginia Opera, I'm looking at the final three operas, Die Fledermaus and A Streetcar Named Desire of André Previn, and concluding with my second favorite opera of all time, The Marriage of Figaro of Mozart. You realize that the rest of our season is the season of cheating husbands, adulterous bad boy husbands. And it's kind of an interesting contrast. The first and last of these, in Die Fledermaus, it's Gabriel von Eisenstein, a suburban businessman outside Vienna, kind of a likable gas bag, and an inveterate skirt chaser. He likes to flirt with the ladies. Well, isn't that exactly like Count Almaviva in The Marriage of Figaro? A sort of a likable blowhard who's very jealous if anybody flirts with his wife, but of course, being the two-faced hypocrite that he is, he doesn't mind trying to cozy up to all the pretty women in his court. And then in the middle, you've got a very dark and very tragic figure in Stanley Kowalski, who forces his attentions on his sister-in-law, Stella, as you'll hear in February. Well, the similarities between Fledermaus and Figaro do not end there. I started thinking about this, and it never occurred to me before. It's why I love my job. I'm always learning. Most of the characters in Die Fledermaus are based directly on the characters in The Marriage of Figaro. I've already pointed out that Eisenstein and Almaviva are pretty much clones of each other. Well, then you've got Rosalinda, Eisenstein's wife, and you've got the Countess Rosina in Figaro. In both cases, the women feel put upon about their husband's infidelity, and they contrive to catch them in a trap, and both of those guys are going to wind up making love to their wives, unaware that it's their wives they're making love to. and face a public humiliation as a result. And in both cases, neither Rosalinda nor the Countess are exactly saintly, because they both are being pursued by admirers. In Rosalinda's case, it's her old boyfriend Alfred, the opera singer, and in Mozart's opera, it's Cherubino the page. And in both cases, they're kind of okay with it. They kind of like the attention. In fact, we learn later that Rosina, the Countess, in the third of Beaumarchais' plays about Figaro, she actually had an illegitimate child by Cherubino. Oopsie. So then you have, of course, Alfred and Cherubino, who are the guys foistering their attention upon the married women. You have pert, likable, common-sense chambermaids. You have Susanna in Figaro and Adele. I say it the German way, not Adele, Adele in Fledermaus. And it's an interesting comparison because Susanna is pre-French Revolution, or right at the time. Adele is with the French Revolution way in your rearview mirror, and society has changed. And so the characters change, reflecting the changes in society. Susanna, when you think about it, is a servant, not an employee. She's a servant. And actually, she is content with her station in life. All Susanna wants is for the Count to leave her alone and stop trying to get her into bed and to marry Figaro. And as far as she's concerned, she can go right on being the servant of the Countess the rest of her life. Adele, on the other hand, we now have this new thing, this middle class. Adele wants to be an actress. She hates her job. She's always trying to claim she's got a sick relative and get out of work. What a change in the job of the chambermaid. And it's all because of politics and what's happened in society. You know, it's the job of art to reflect the society. A good piece of art is a mirror, and you see society reflected back in it. And then finally, it even comes down to side characters like Dr. Blint, who is the stuttering comical attorney, the personal lawyer for Eisenstein in Fledermaus, an officious little stuttering guy that we want to slap. And then in, who do we have in Marriage of Figaro? We have Don Curzio, the notary, who also is a stuttering, officious little busybody. So really, this is kind of Marriage of Figaro light. And with that in mind, let's see how Strauss tells his story. Well, I guess we have to quickly go through the backstory. We must explain what this title, Die Fledermaus, the bat, or as we said in our Italian production, Il Pipistrello, what it means. Who was the bat? Well, you have to understand that before the curtain goes up, there was a big costume ball last season in which Eisenstein and his best friend, they were probably fraternity brothers together in college, Dr. Falca, they went to a costume ball together. Eisenstein as a butterfly, Falca as a bat. He was in a bat suit with the big ears and the wings and the webbed feet and so forth. He looked ridiculous, but it's all fun. And on their way home, sharing a coach, Falca had too much champagne and passed out, and so to punk him a little bit, Eisenstein carries the sleeping Falca and leaves him on a bench in the town square of downtown Vienna, where the following morning he awakens to find all the businessmen and attorneys and professionals and housewives laughing at him while, red-faced with humiliation, he trudges home in his bat suit. And everything that happens in this show is Dr. Falca's revenge. He is going to play a joke on Eisenstein, and that will consist of Eisenstein being in the humiliating position of making love to his own wife unawares, thinking that he's flirting with a stranger. And all of the characters, other than Falca himself and Prince Orlovsky, who will host the big party in Act 2, are in on the joke pretty much. Well, Adele we meet right off. And she has gotten a letter from her sister, Ida, telling her about the ball and telling her to steal a dress from her mistress, Rosalinda, and to come to the ball. And Adele is very excited. We're going to hear a little excerpt here, and I want you to notice the uninteresting vocal line of Adele's first solo, while behind her the orchestra is playing a merry dance tune that we'll hear again at the party.
kannst du dir eine Toilette von deinen Gnädigen annektieren und elegant dich präsentieren, so will ich gern dich ein dort führen.
Now, what did you notice there? Was that the most beautiful vocal melody you've ever heard? Well, no. It was mostly repeated notes. What's going on there? Who would want to sing that? Well, actually, it turns out that our waltz king, who spent his whole life just writing dance music, is a pretty good dramatist as well. He knows how to use music to create a character. Keep in mind what Adele is doing there is reading a letter. Adele is a chambermaid. She didn't go to Yale. She's not highly educated. You ever hear somebody who's not highly educated read out loud? Dear Adele, you should come to the ball to... It's really very charming. This is how Strauss is depicting this, girl who has a basic education reading out loud. Like many folks of less than scholarly pursuits, she tends to read in a monotone. It's very charming. Well, Eisenstein blusters in. He's got a problem, as you probably know. He's got to go to jail. He can't go to the ball because he's insulted a public official and received a sentence of a week in jail. Well, this is disastrous for Falca's plan. The whole party that's going to be Act Two is for nothing if Eisenstein isn't there, because the entire point of the party is to humiliate Eisenstein. So Falca must come over and persuade him to play hooky from jail for a few hours and just show up the next morning. Nobody's going to care. And besides, he says, all the most beautiful women in Vienna will be there. Now listen, we hear the same tune in the orchestra that we heard with Adele, but Falca is not reading, so he gets to sing a more traditional vocal melody.
In der stillen Kammer laborierst am Katzenjammer, musst du dich des Lebens Fräulein für Bruder sein. Ballerinnen leicht beschwingt in den blendendsten Toiletten, fesseln dich mit Rosenketten, wenn die Polka-Glocke klingt. Fräulein, glaub mir, das verjüngt, bei rauschenden Tönen im blendenden...
All right, now, the next excerpt you're going to hear is really kind of a metaphor for the entire opera, and it's a metaphor for the zeitgeist of Vienna in the 19th century, in which people, again, they were not as ambitious. The musicians were not writing cosmic symphonies and serious string quartets. They were writing frivolous music. It was a frivolous time. People wanted to escape the constant adversity in their lives. What did Americans watch during the Great Depression? They watched Shirley Temple movies and Charlie Chaplin movies. Escapism. And so here we have two men, grown men, successful businessmen, who are jumping up and down like little boys in glee to think that we go to the party. Listen to this. Yeah, I don't think either one of them is going to be appointed to the Supreme Court with this kind of behavior. Each of them is a man-child. Each of them is about 14 years old emotionally. Well, now we have a trio. And again, you might think, my friends, that if you've heard one waltz, you've heard them all. Yeah, but not when the waltzes are in the context of conveying drama. It is amazing what Johann Strauss Jr. can convey with a waltz tune. For instance, you're about to hear a waltz of lugubrious fake dolor and deception. There is a trio in which three people are all lying. Now that Eisenstein's going to the ball, he has to pretend he's going to prison. And Rosalinda, who knows for darn sure that he's going to the ball, has to pretend bereft with despair. Oh, what will I do without you? Oh, little Scarlett O'Hara, what shall I do? Where shall I go? And Adele is also pretending to be very, sad, even though she doesn't really care. She's going to the ball, regardless of whether she gets the night off from Rosalinda or not. So they're all pretending to be in the depths of despair. And here is a waltz tune, and there's something clever happens. There is a 3/4 melody of this fake despair. And then listen to what happens when the meter changes to double time. And the words don't change. They're still saying, oh no, this is awful. But listen to how the affect changes. So off they go. Eisenstein oddly dressed in tails, a top hat, and a cape, and a walking stick to go to jail. But never mind. Well, this is Alfred's chance. He is the old flame of Rosalinda, who is now sees that the coast is clear and it's okay to come in and make himself at home and try to get a little kissy-huggy time with Rosalinda. And now we're going to get another waltz tune in their duet. Instead of the waltz of fake lugubrious dolor, now it's going to be a seductive waltz because he's, I think of Joey from the TV show Friends. How you doing? This is what is being expressed in this waltz tune. And before I play it, I want to tell you the words that you're going to hear him sing in German. And of course, we're going to do it in English, but in German, glücklich ist, wer vergisst, was doch nicht zu enden ist. What does that mean? Well, my friends, that is the slogan for Vienna in the 50-year period from 1830 to 1880. It means, happy is he who can forget what can't be changed. Here's seductive Alfred.
Schwöre wieder mir aufs Neu, und ich glaub ihr kühn. Glücklich macht uns Illusion, ist doch kurz die ganze Freud. Sei getrost, ich glaub dir schon, und bin glücklich glücklich ist, wer vergisst, was doch nicht zu ändern ist. Glücklich ist, wer vergisst, was nicht zu ändern ist.
Ah, yes, glücklich ist indeed. Well, the next thing that happens, Alfred has made himself quite at home. He's poured himself a drink. He's taken off his clothes. He's put on the night clothes of Eisenstein, making himself right at home, expecting that he will soon be occupying Eisenstein's bed. And who comes in but the prison warden, Frank, my character from my production a couple of years ago. And Frank has also been invited to the party, oddly enough, the prison warden. And so he has shown up because Eisenstein is late. Where is he? I don't want to be late to the ball. So he's come to collect his prisoner. And of course, he sees Alfred there. And as far as he knows, that could be, Eisenstein. He doesn't know what Eisenstein looks like. So he's saying, come along, sir. By the way, again, to show you the attitude towards life in Vienna, even Frank, the prison warden, is coerced by Alfred into having a drink and singing about happy is he who can forget all the bad stuff in life.
Sing mit mir, sing mit mir, sing, sing, sing. Meinetwegen.
Well, Rosalinda is in an awkward position. She can either say, "Oh no, Warden, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. This is a family friend. He's like a brother to me. It's very, I know it looks odd, but this is really, my husband is gone right now." Or she can say, "Yes, husband, what's wrong with you? You should be in jail." And put Alfred in an awkward position. Well, that's what she chooses to do. Now, there's a very wonderful trio for Frank, Alfred, and Rosalinda. So far, we've had the waltz of lugubrious fake dolor, the waltz of seduction. Now we're going to have a waltz, and I want you to notice the pitch-perfect psychology of the tune here. The verse, this is the typical couplets form of verse, refrain that you find in operetta. The verse is in double time, the refrain in waltz time. And in each of them, the rhythm perfectly captures the affect of impromptu, quickly improvising a lie on your feet. Thinking fast, nervous lying, saying things like, because, Frank is suspicious. Is this really your husband? What do you mean, is this my husband? Well, how could you suspect, such a thing? I mean, gee whiz, who do you think I am? Notice the perfect way that the little hesitations and yet the smoothness as she improvises a lie. Oh, that is just such good stuff. It's good theater. It's more than just nice tunes. It's good theater. Well, Act 2 of Die Fledermaus is probably the single most sparkling, entertaining, lively act in all of theater. Not just opera, not just music. It's just if you're bored by Act 2 of Die Fledermaus, there's really something wrong with you, and you need some Prozac. Now, there are 4 cultures that have produced the standard operettas: Gilbert and Sullivan, typifying England; Offenbach, typifying France; Strauss and Lehar, typifying Vienna; and of course Victor Herbert and Lerner and Loewe, typifying America. We have our operettas too. France and England resemble each other in that Offenbach and Gilbert and Sullivan stay away from sentiment, from sincere emotion. They like to mock sentiment. Everything is satire. There's, you never get a lump in your throat or tears in your eyes in it's sort of a silly humor. There's a silly edge to the humor in both of those, whereas ours resembles the Viennese. Not only our musicals like Rodgers and Hammerstein are based on the storytelling and the music of Viennese operetta, but actually a lot of our early sitcoms were as well. When I think of 2 characters in Die Fledermaus, Adele and Rosalinda, each of those could have been played by Lucille Ball. They are both characters we're familiar with. In the case of Adele, you know how Lucy would always try to pull a con on Ricky by fake crying, "Wah! Lucy, what's the matter?" Well, that was what Adele did to Rosalinda in scene 1, claiming her aunt was sick so she could go to the ball. And now we find Adele at the ball, pretending to be a glamorous star of the theater, wearing one of her mistress's dresses that she stole out of the closet. It's like Lucy trying to sneak into Ricky's act at the Copa, actually. And when Eisenstein recognizes her, she has to try to pull it off and say, well, I don't know what you mean. What could you be talking about? Me, a maid? Oh, why, that's laughable. And thus we get the famous laughing song, which is another kind of waltz tune, again, with its own affect, that of somebody trying to carry off an impersonation.
Wenn mich dies Gesicht schon genügend spricht, so sehen Sie die Figur. Schau durch die Lorgnette sich an, sich diese tolle Figur an. Mir scheint wohl die Liebe macht ihre Augen trübe. Wir schweben so vergnügt, hat sie Herz erfüllt. Der schweben so vergnügt, hat sie Herz erfüllt. Nun sehen sie überall, sehr komisch ist der Fall. Ja, sehr komisch ist die Sache. Drum verzeihen Sie, wenn ich lache.
Yes, the number that every single undergraduate soprano in the history of music education has had to stand in the curve of the piano and sing, with often disastrous results. But that was pretty good right there. Now, the whole point of this is to get Eisenstein to make love to his wife, thinking it's someone else. So we need to hear that. Eisenstein has a surefire gadget that always interests the chicks. It's a surefire way to grab him some girlfriend. He's got a fancy watch. These days it would be a smartphone, that does all sorts of things. They didn't have smartphones then, but he has this fancy mechanical watch with a really interesting mechanism. And it's a surefire line. Hey, baby, want to come look at my watch? It's really cool. It always works. And so Rosalinda, disguised as a mysterious Hungarian countess, it shows, oh, yes, I would love to see your watch, sir. So we have an amusing duet called the Watch Duet, in which this likable gasbag Eisenstein is putting the moves on his own wife.
Du entgehst den Strafen nicht.
Ach, wie leicht kann es entschweben, dies holde Zauberbild, wirst du nicht die Maske lieben, die dein Antlitz mir verhüllt.
Oh, yeah, he's got the moves. He's a chick magnet, all right. And, of course, it's important for the plot that she actually snatched that watch away from him, which he did not intend. Oh, you're giving it to me. Why, thank you. And she's got it and sticks it down her décolletage in most productions. And now, oops, she's got the evidence, doesn't she, of his philandering. Well, to break the ice, Prince Orlovsky, who we don't have time to hear from today, sorry about that. He's got wonderful numbers as well, one of those great trouser rolls. Orlovsky asks the Hungarian countess to sing a song of her homeland. They made her Hungarian, did the librettists, so that Strauss Jr. could write a csárdas, which when Liszt plays on the piano, we call a Hungarian rhapsody. The csárdas, an ethnic form of music that's associated with gypsies, has two sections of an expressive, nostalgic lassù that's followed by a lively gypsy friska. And Strauss, nobody does this better than him. Here's a little bit of a sample of each of those.
Du
if I was still a pianist, I would absolutely make a transcription of that in Lisztian style and play it. It would make a great piano piece. Anyway, well, that's kind of the icebreaker that this party needed. Now that everybody's in a more relaxed frame of mind, hearing that spectacular showpiece, the waiters bring out the champagne and everybody starts to get down and boogie. And there is a very famous, lively number in praise of King Champagne. And you need to know that while the region of Champagne in France had been producing wine for some time, the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century had produced technologies that could efficiently and in mass quantities produce the sparkling beverage that we know today. It was a new development in beverage history at the time of Die Fledermaus. So they were being quite au courant in having a number like this to celebrate King Champagne. Hey, all right, now comes a moment in Act 2 that lifts Die Fledermaus from an entertaining show into a minor masterpiece, which has the possibility for you of a miracle of theater. And I will explain. There is a word you've probably heard, and you may know what it means, but then again, you may not, because we don't have an English word that corresponds to it. It is the German word Gemütlichkeit. In order to give you the sense of what is meant by Gemütlichkeit, we must use a series of English synonyms. And part of this is a holdover from the Biedermeier period. The Biedermeier period was a time of cozy domesticity. And coziness is one of the aspects of Gemütlichkeit. Here are some others. Friendliness, affability, leisureliness, unhurriedness, approachability, good fellowship, relaxation, friendship, intimacy. Now, after the King Champagne, at this point in the drama, it's probably 3 a.m. These people have been dancing and dining and gambling and kissing and flirting for hours, since like 7 p.m. or so. They become a tight little group. And Dr. Falke takes a moment to say, hey, folks, Brüderlein und Schwesterlein, he sings, brothers and sisters. And I'm not going to translate right now. I'm going to just paraphrase what he says to give you the sense of it. He says, do you feel it? Do you feel this togetherness? Aren't you glad you're here right now? Do you feel the bond between all of us? By now they're all, they've paired up, boy, girl, boy, girl. My character, Frank, has paired up with Adele because she thinks he's a big producer with deep pockets who will fund her theatrical career, and he's willing to play that part. And Falke says, look, in German they have 2 forms of the word you. They have the formal Sie and the informal du. And he says, look, let's drop this Sie business. Let's use the informal du. He sings, erst ein Kuss, first a kiss, and then it's du, du, du. Do you feel it? Don't you feel that Gemütlichkeit? And here's where I want to tell you. You'd rather see Die Fledermaus, in my opinion, at Virginia Opera than at the Metropolitan Opera. Because I'll tell you my experience. When I sang the role of Frank in Italy, we had been living together for a month. It was a festival. We all lived at the same hotel, a little family-style hotel in the outskirts of Rome, eating all our meals together, sightseeing together, rehearsing together, coaching together, choreography together. We lived together. We ate, drank, slept, and breathed Die Fledermaus together for a month. And by the time we sang this number, this glorious ensemble that I'm going to play about 3 minutes worth of for you in a moment, we did love each other like that. Maybe we wouldn't see each other for years after the festival was over, but right in that moment, we did feel that kinship, that intimacy that had been fostered by weeks of living together. And when we sang Ernst ein Kuss and then it's Du, we meant it. We felt the Gemütlichkeit was real. It wasn't acting. And what can happen, if that happens in a performance, if it's real, if the cast has developed that bond with each other over weeks of rehearsing, which I'm sorry you don't get at the Met. They fly in from Mexico City and Zurich and so forth 48 hours before the performance. They walk through their blocking because they've all done it a million times. They're acting. Maybe in our cast at Virginia Opera, and I don't know. I don't know how they're getting along. Maybe they hate each other. I don't know. But I doubt it. They were rehearsing together for weeks. What might happen, my friends, is that if the Gemütlichkeit is something palpable on the stage, it can spill over into the audience. You might feel it too. And you might look over at the stranger next to you that you've never seen before and say, I'm so glad you're here. Isn't this wonderful? Aren't we all having such a great time? Don't you wish this could just never... It can be a little miracle. 1,500 people at the Harrison Opera House all feeling like they're best friends through the miracle of music like this. And oh, did you feel it? Did you feel the Gemütlichkeit? I did. It gets me every time. Now listen, I wish I had another hour to show you all the splendors of this greatest of operettas. But, come to the Harrison Opera House. come on Saturday or whenever you can, the Sunday matinee. It's going to be a hard ticket to get. You don't want to miss it. The paradox about all of that Gemütlichkeit there, they all love each other so much, and yet they're all lying. Not one person is who he's pretending to be. They're all under assumed identities other than Orlovsky and Falke. And of course, Falke has his revenge. Eisenstein has to eat a little crow when Rosalinda pulls out the watch and says, "Yes, and what have you been up to tonight?" And he, just like the Count, he has to beg forgiveness. And just like the Countess, she gives it. And just as in Figaro, you and I realize that all of this nice, wonderful forgiveness is highly temporary. These are patterns of behavior that will continue into the future. Well, that's why I like comedy. Comedy understands. Comedy is wiser than tragedy. Comedy knows that when we make mistakes, it's hardly ever the end of the world. You know, in Otello and Trovatore, everybody drops dead at the end because our mistakes mean that it's the end of the world. Oh, no. Comedy is wiser than that. Comedy knows that mostly when we mess up in life and are foolish, that we learn our lesson, we tuck our tail between our legs, and we get up the next morning and muddle on. That's what life mostly is. I'll see you at the Opera House.